Maria had never felt more out of place in her entire life. She stood in the massive entrance hall of the Grand Celestial Hotel, her fingers gripping her small black purse so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Above her head, chandeliers the size of small cars sparkled with what looked like a million tiny lights. The marble floor beneath her feet was so polished she could almost see her reflection in it. This wasn't her world. Not even close. 6 months ago, Maria had been running her family's small bakery in a town most people had never heard of. She'd wake up at 4 in the morning to start the ovens, spend her days covered in flour, and go to bed smelling like bread and cinnamon. It was simple. It was honest work. And she'd been happy. Then David walked into her bakery one Tuesday afternoon, soaking wet from the rain, and everything changed. David Chen was the kind of man you read about in magazines. A billionaire who'd built his fortune from nothing, always featured in those lists of most successful entrepreneurs under 40. But when he walked into her bakery that day, she didn't know any of that. She just saw a guy with kind eyes who ordered the worst pastries in the display case because they looked like they needed to be eaten. Their romance had been like something out of a movie. He came back every day for 2 weeks straight, always ordering things nobody else wanted, always staying to chat with her between customers. By the 3rd week, he'd asked her to dinner. By the 2nd month, she knew she was falling in love. And by the 4th month, he'd proposed right there in her bakery, getting down on one knee while the morning regulars cheered and cried. Now here she was, Mrs. Maria Chen, attending her husband's annual charity gala. She'd tried to prepare herself for this. She'd watched videos online about how to act at fancy events. She'd practiced walking in heels around their apartment. She'd even spent way too much money on a navy blue dress that the saleswoman promised was perfect for the occasion, but nothing could have prepared her for this. The other women at the gala looked like they'd stepped off a runway. Their dresses probably cost more than Maria used to make in 6 months. Their jewelry caught the light every time they moved. They held their champagne glasses with this casual elegance, like they'd been born knowing how to stand at events like this. Maria felt like a kid playing dress-up in her mother's closet. David had been swept away within minutes of their arrival. A group of investors had cornered him near the bar, all of them eager to discuss some deal that couldn't wait. He'd given her an apologetic look, squeezed her hand, and promised to be back in just a few minutes. That had been 45 minutes ago. So Maria had been left to navigate conversations with people who clearly didn't know what to make of her. They'd smile politely and ask questions that felt like little tests. Where did you go to school? What does your family do? How did you and David meet? Every answer she gave seemed to confirm what they were already thinking. She wasn't one of them. She didn't belong here. The worst was Mrs. Victoria Pemberton, the wife of David's business partner. She had this way of looking at Maria like she was studying a bug under a microscope. Curious, but also slightly disgusted. She'd asked about the bakery with this tone that made it sound like Maria had been working at a gas station. Not that there was anything wrong with that, but the way she said it made everything feel small and embarrassing. Maria had smiled through it all. She'd been polite and gracious and everything David deserved in a wife. But inside, she felt like she was drowning. The evening had been going as well as could be expected until the announcement came. The event coordinator, a thin woman with a headset and a clipboard, rushed onto the small stage near the front of the ballroom. She looked panicked. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid I have some unfortunate news," she said into the microphone, her voice tight with stress. "Our scheduled performer for this evening has taken ill and won't be able to make it. We're working on finding a replacement, but it may take some time." The crowd murmured with disappointment. This was supposed to be the highlight of the evening. Some famous opera singer was meant to perform. Maria had actually been looking forward to it. Music was one of the few things that made her feel at peace in situations like this. That's when everything went wrong. Mrs. Pemberton's voice cut through the crowd like a knife. "Wait, I have a wonderful idea." She was looking directly at Maria with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "David's lovely wife used to sing in her church choir. I'm sure she'd be more than happy to step in and entertain us all." Maria's blood ran cold. Every head in the room seemed to turn toward her at once. 500 pairs of eyes. 500 people waiting to see what she'd do. She caught David's face across the room. He looked shocked, then angry. He started pushing through the crowd toward her. But Mrs. Pemberton was already at Maria's side, her hand gripping Maria's elbow with surprising strength. "Oh, don't be modest, dear," Mrs. Pemberton said. her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm sure everyone would love to hear you sing. You wouldn't want to disappoint all these people, would you?" It would be so embarrassing for David if his wife couldn't handle a simple little song at his own event. Maria's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. This was a setup. She could see it in Mrs. Pemberton's eyes. The woman wanted to humiliate her, to prove once and for all that the baker's daughter didn't belong in this world. The crowd was watching, waiting, judging. Mrs. Pemberton was already guiding her toward the stage, keeping up that bright, encouraging smile for the audience while her fingers dug into Maria's arm. "Come now, dear. Everyone's waiting." Maria's legs felt like they might give out as she climbed the steps to the stage. The ballroom looked even bigger from up here. Row after row of tables filled with New York's elite, CEOs and celebrities, politicians and old money families who'd probably been attending events like this for generations. And here was Maria, a girl from a town of 3,000 people. A girl whose biggest performance before this had been singing at Sunday services for 50 people, most of whom were either related to her or had known her since she was born. The pianist, an older gentleman in a tailcoat, stood waiting by the grand piano. He gave her a kind look, probably feeling sorry for her. "What would you like to sing, Mrs. Chen?" Maria's mind went completely blank. She couldn't think of a single song, not one. The murmuring in the crowd was getting louder. She could hear snippets of conversation floating up to the stage. People wondering if she could actually sing. People making bets on how badly this was about to go. David had reached the front of the crowd. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched into fists. She knew that look. He was furious, but not at her. Never at her. He was angry that she'd been put in this position, manipulated and cornered like this. He started to step forward. She knew what he was about to do. He was going to stop this whole thing. He was going to tell everyone that his wife didn't need to prove anything to anyone, that they could all go to hell if they thought they could treat her this way. And that's when something clicked in Maria's head. She'd spent 6 months feeling like she wasn't good enough for this world. 6 months listening to whispers and seeing those looks. 6 months making herself smaller and quieter, trying to fit into a box that was never meant for her. But standing on that stage looking at David, at this incredible man who'd chosen her not because of what she could give him, but because of who she was, Maria realized something. She'd been hiding the parts of herself that mattered most, hiding her voice, her passion, her strength. Her mother used to tell her that God gave everyone a gift and it was a sin to waste it. Maria's gift had always been her voice, and she'd locked it away out of fear. Not anymore. Maria straightened her shoulders. She turned to the pianist and, in a voice that didn't shake at all, made a request that made his eyebrows shoot up. She asked for Ave Maria, in Latin, one of the hardest pieces a singer could perform, the song her mother had taught her when she was just a girl, standing in their kitchen while bread rose in the oven. The pianist's surprise lasted only a moment. Then his fingers moved to the keys and the opening notes filled the grand ballroom. Maria closed her eyes, let the familiar melody wash over her, and remembered who she really was. The first notes from the piano seemed to echo forever in that massive ballroom. Maria kept her eyes closed, focusing on her breathing the way her old music teacher had taught her. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Steady, calm. Even though her heart was racing like she'd just run a marathon. She thought about her mother's kitchen back home. The way flour would dust every surface no matter how careful they were. The warm smell of bread baking. Her mother's patient voice guiding her through this exact song when she was just 12 years old. "Feel the music, mija," her mother would say. "Don't just sing the notes. Tell the story." When Maria opened her mouth and the first note came out, something magical happened. The sound that emerged was pure and clear, floating effortlessly across the room. Ave Maria, gratia plena. The Latin words felt natural on her tongue, like coming home after a long journey. The restless energy in the crowd disappeared instantly. Conversations that had been happening in hushed whispers died mid-sentence. Champagne glasses that were halfway to lips froze in the air. Even the waiters along the WO all stopped moving, their trays balanced perfectly still as they listened. Maria's voice had always been special. Her childhood music teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, used to call it a gift from heaven. It was a soprano voice that could be powerful without being harsh, delicate without being weak. But it wasn't just the technical quality that made people stop and listen. It was the emotion. The way Maria could pour everything she felt into every single word. She sang about grace and faith, about loss and love, about a life that hadn't always been easy but had been real. Every phrase built on the last one, the melody rising and falling like waves. She navigated the challenging runs and difficult intervals with ease, muscle memory taking over from years of practice that nobody in this room knew she'd had. David stood at the front of the crowd, completely frozen. One hand gripped the back of a chair so hard his knuckles had gone white. He'd known Maria could sing. She'd mentioned it casually once or twice, always brushing it off when he asked about it. "Oh, I just sang in church," she'd say with that shy smile. Nothing special. But this was something else entirely. This was the voice of someone who'd been professionally trained. Someone who'd studied for years. Someone who could have had a career. A real career doing this. How had he not known? How had she never told him? He watched his wife on that stage, really seeing her maybe for the first time. The woman he thought he knew inside and out was revealing layers he'd never even suspected existed, and he felt this strange mix of pride and heartbreak. Pride because she was absolutely incredible. Heartbreak because she'd been hiding this part of herself. And he hadn't even realized it. As Maria's voice soared through the challenging high notes in the middle of the piece, holding them with breathtaking control, David saw tears streaming down faces throughout the crowd. These were people who'd been to the Met, who'd heard the greatest singers in the world. And his wife, his Maria, was moving them to tears in her simple navy dress with her eyes closed and her whole heart on display. Mrs. Pemberton had gone completely pale. She stood off to the side, her mouth slightly open, looking like she'd just watched a car crash. This wasn't supposed to happen. She'd meant to embarrass the girl, to show everyone that David had married beneath him. Instead, she'd just given Maria a stage to prove she was extraordinary. Maria could feel the shift in the room even with her eyes closed. The way the energy had changed from skeptical and dismissive to completely captivated, it reminded her of why she'd fallen in love with singing in the first place. Not because of the attention or the applause, but because of this connection. This ability to make people feel something real. The song was building toward its climax now. The part where everything came together. Maria opened her eyes for the first time since she'd started singing, and she looked directly at David. This was for him, this part of herself she'd been hiding. She wanted him to see it, all of it. When she hit the final high notes, her voice filled every corner of that enormous room. It was powerful and pure and absolutely perfect. She held the last note, letting it ring out clear and true before letting it fade into silence. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The ballroom was completely silent. Then the applause started. It wasn't polite charity event applause. It was thunderous. Everyone was on their feet. People were shouting, "Brava!" Some were still crying. Others were just staring at her in complete shock. The pianist had stood up too, bowing to her with genuine respect in his eyes. Maria gave a small curtsy, the way she'd been taught years ago, and carefully made her way down the stage steps. Her legs were shaking so badly she had to concentrate on each step. The adrenaline was starting to wear off and reality was crashing back in. Had that really just happened? Had she really just done that? David reached her before anyone else could. He pulled her into his arms right there in front of everyone, not caring who saw or what they thought. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered into her hair. His voice was rough with emotion. "Maria, why didn't you tell me you could sing like that?" "I knew you sang, but that was incredible." Maria didn't get a chance to answer because suddenly they were surrounded. The conductor of the Metropolitan Opera was pushing through the crowd, pressing his business card into her hand. "You must audition for us," he was saying. "Please, Mrs. Chen, you have to come audition." A woman in a red dress introduced herself as a Broadway producer. She wanted to talk about an upcoming show. A music professor from Juilliard was asking if she'd ever considered teaching. Even Mrs. Pemberton came over, though she looked like she was chewing on glass. She managed to force out what sounded like a compliment, though her smile never reached her eyes. Maria felt overwhelmed. All these people wanting things from her, offering things to her. It was too much. She could feel herself starting to panic, her breath coming short and fast. David noticed immediately. He'd always been good at reading her. "Excuse us," he said firmly to the crowd, his arms still around her. "My wife needs some air." He guided her through the ballroom, ignoring the people trying to stop them, and out onto a quiet balcony overlooking the city. The cool night air hit Maria's face and she breathed in deeply, grateful for the space and silence. For a long moment, they just stood there. The sounds of the party were muffled through the glass doors. Below them, New York City sparkled with a million lights. Maria rested her hands on the balcony railing, still trying to process everything that had just happened. "Tell me," David said finally. His voice was gentle but firm. "Tell me the story I don't know." Maria looked out at the city lights, gathering her thoughts. She'd kept this locked away for so long. Part of her had wanted to tell him 100 times, but she'd always stopped herself, afraid he'd see her differently, afraid he'd feel sorry for her, afraid of so many things. But after tonight, after putting herself out there in front of all those people, keeping secrets seemed pointless. "I got a full scholarship to Juilliard when I was 18, she said quietly. "Full ride. They said I was the youngest student they'd accepted that year. They said I had potential for an international career." David was very still beside her. She could feel him listening with his whole body, the way he did when something really mattered. "I loved it there," Maria continued. "It was hard. Really hard. Everyone was so talented and the competition was intense. But I was thriving. For the first time in my life, I was around people who understood what music meant to me, who felt it the same way I did." She paused, her fingers tightening on the railing. "This was the hard part. Then halfway through my first year, I got a call. My dad had a heart attack. Massive. He died before the ambulance even got there." Her voice cracked slightly. "I came home for the funeral thinking I'd just stay for a week or two. But when I got there, I saw my mom. She was completely lost, drowning in grief and bills and trying to run the bakery alone, the bakery that had been in our family for 3 generations. David's hand covered hers on the railing, warm and solid. "I couldn't leave her," Maria said simply. "I couldn't go back to New York and pursue my dreams while she lost everything. So I withdrew from Juilliard. I came home, and I learned how to bake bread instead of singing arias." "Maria," David breathed, and she could hear the pain in his voice. "Don't," she said quickly, turning to look at him. "Don't feel sorry for me. I made that choice and I never regretted it. Not once. I got 7 more years with my mom before the cancer took her. 7 years I wouldn't have had if I'd stayed at Juilliard. 7 years of working beside her, learning her recipes, hearing her stories. Do you know how precious that was?" She smiled, tears starting to fall now. "And if I'd stayed in New York, I never would have been in that bakery on a rainy Tuesday when a billionaire with terrible taste in pastries walked through my door and changed my whole life." David laughed, despite the tears in his own eyes. "The cinnamon rolls were good," he protested weakly. "They were 3 days old," Maria reminded him, laughing too now. "I gave them to you for free because I was literally about to throw them out. And then you came back the next day and ordered the exact same thing. I knew right then you either had no taste buds or you were the kindest person I'd ever met." "I came back to see you," David admitted. "I didn't care about the pastries at all." They stood on that balcony for a while longer, just holding each other as the city buzzed below them. Maria felt lighter than she had in months, maybe years, like she'd been carrying this heavy secret around and finally set it down. The cool breeze dried the tears on her face and she could hear the muffled sounds of music and conversation from the party inside. "Do you miss it?" David asked eventually. His voice was careful, like he was afraid of the answer. "Singing professionally? Having that career? Because Maria, if you do, we can make it happen. You could go back to school or audition or whatever you want. Money isn't an issue. We could hire people to help with anything you need." Maria pulled back slightly so she could look at him properly. His face was so earnest, so ready to give her anything she asked for. It was one of the things she loved most about him. He didn't just say nice things. He meant them. He'd move mountains for her if she asked. "I don't miss that dream," she said carefully, thinking about how to explain it. "The dream I had when I was 18 of being a famous opera singer traveling the world. That dream belonged to a different person. A girl who hadn't lost her father yet, who hadn't spent 7 years learning what really matters in life." She reached up and touched his face, her thumb brushing across his cheek. "But I do miss singing. Tonight reminded me how much I love it, how much it's part of who I am. And I think I've been hiding that part because I was scared." "Scared of what?" David asked, though she thought maybe he already knew. "Scared that I wasn't enough," Maria admitted. "Just being me. The baker's daughter. I thought maybe I needed to be smaller, simpler, that if you saw all of me, all the complicated, messy parts, you might realize you'd made a mistake. David pulled her close again, his arms tight around her. Maria Chen, you listen to me. You are more than enough. You've always been more than enough. I didn't fall in love with a simple girl. I fell in love with you. All of you. The parts I knew and the parts I'm still discovering. He pulled back now, his hands on her shoulders, making sure she was looking at him. I fell in love with the way you remembered every customer's name at the bakery, the way you'd give free bread to Mrs. Patterson on Wednesdays, because you knew her pension check didn't come until Thursday, the way you'd hum while you worked, not even realizing you were doing it. Maria felt fresh tears starting, but happy ones this time. I fell in love with your strength, David continued. The way you took care of your mom without complaining, the way you built something beautiful from scratch, the way you can make anyone feel welcome and valued. That's who you are, Maria. And tonight, watching you up on that stage, I didn't fall in love with a different person. I fell in love with you all over again. The same you. Just more of you than I got to see before. They stayed on the balcony until the cool air made Maria shiver in her thin dress. When they went back inside, the party had shifted into a different phase. People were dancing now, the formal part of the evening over. But Maria noticed the looks they got as they walked through. Different from before, not skeptical or dismissive. Now people looked at her with respect, with interest, like she was someone worth knowing. It should have felt good, and part of it did. But another part of Maria felt uncomfortable with how quickly things had changed. These same people who'd been judging her an hour ago now wanted to be her friend, because she could sing. It felt fake somehow. Mrs. Pemberton approached them near the bar. She looked like she'd been drinking, her usual perfect posture slightly off. Mrs. Chen, she said, her words just a tiny bit slurred. I must apologize. I had no idea you were so talented. If I'd known, I never would have put you on the spot like that. Maria almost laughed. The woman still didn't get it. She wasn't sorry for being cruel. She was sorry that her cruelty had backfired. It's fine, Maria said, because what else could she say at her husband's charity event? But David's hand tightened on her waist, and she knew he was thinking the same thing she was. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. More people wanting to talk to her. More business cards pressed into her hand. Offers and opportunities, and people who suddenly found her fascinating. David stayed close to her side the whole time. A solid presence she could lean on when it all got too overwhelming. When they finally got home around midnight, Maria kicked off her heels the second they walked through the door. Thank God, she groaned. I thought my feet were going to fall off. David laughed, loosening his tie. You made it look effortless. Nobody would have known you were suffering. Years of practice, Maria joked. You learn to smile through the pain when you're icing wedding cakes in a hot kitchen in the middle of summer. She walked to the big windows that looked out over the city, still in her navy dress. Their apartment was on the 42nd floor, high enough that the street noise barely reached them. Sometimes living this high up made her feel disconnected from the real world. But tonight, looking out at all those lights, she felt different, more grounded somehow. David came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. What are you thinking about? Everything, Maria said honestly. Tonight, the past, the future. How weird life is. 6 months ago, I was worried about whether I could afford to fix the broken oven at the bakery. Now I'm standing in a luxury apartment after singing at a charity gala, where people wore jewelry worth more than my childhood home. Having regrets? David asked quietly. No, Maria said immediately, turning in his arms to face him. Not even a little bit. It's just a lot to process, you know? And I keep thinking about what happens now. What do you mean? Maria gestured vaguely toward where her purse sat on the counter, stuffed full of business cards. All those people want me to audition. To perform. To be something. And part of me wants to. I felt so alive up there tonight. But another part of me is terrified. What if I'm not actually that good? What if tonight was just a fluke? What if I try to do this and fail? David guided her to the couch and they sat down together, her legs curled up under her. First of all, he said, tonight was definitely not a fluke. You were incredible. I've been to enough of these events to know the difference between polite applause and genuine amazement. Those people were amazed, but that doesn't mean I could actually have a career, Maria argued. Singing one song at a charity event is different from auditioning at the Met or performing 8 shows a week on Broadway. I haven't trained seriously in over 7 years. My technique might be rusty. And I'm 32 now, not 18. Maybe I missed my window. Or maybe you're exactly where you're supposed to be, David countered gently. Maria, I'm not saying you have to do anything. If you want to just keep running the bakery and never sing publicly again, that's completely fine. But I also don't want you to not do something because you're afraid. Fear is the worst reason to make a decision. Maria knew he was right. Fear had been driving so many of her choices lately without her even realizing it. Fear of not fitting in. Fear of being judged. Fear of not being enough. What would you do? She asked. If you were me? David was quiet for a moment, really thinking about it. Honestly, I'd probably be terrified too. But I think I'd also be really excited. You just got reminded of something you love. Something you're amazing at. That doesn't happen every day. Most people go their whole lives without finding that thing that makes them come alive. He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. I think I'd explore it. Not because you have to become some famous singer, but because you deserve to see what's possible. Take one of those meetings. Go to one audition. See how it feels. You don't have to decide your whole future right now. Just take the next step and see where it leads. Maria leaned her head on his shoulder, thinking about his words. Taking things one step at a time. She could do that. She didn't have to have all the answers right now. When did you get so wise? She murmured. I married you, didn't I? David said. That was pretty wise. Maria laughed and swatted his arm. But she was also thinking about something else he'd said earlier. About how he'd fallen in love with her strength. With the way she took care of people. And suddenly she had an idea. What if, she said slowly, the thought forming as she spoke. What if I could do both? Not give up the bakery, but also have music in my life again? What if there was a way to use singing to help people the way I tried to help them at the bakery? David lifted his head to look at her. I'm listening. I'm not sure exactly what it would look like yet, Maria admitted. But tonight made me think about all the talented kids back home, who never got the chances I got, who probably have amazing gifts but will never get to develop them because their families can't afford it, or because they'd have to choose between their dreams and taking care of their families. She sat up straighter, getting more excited as the idea took shape. What if there was a way to help them? Not just with money, but with actual support? With making it possible to pursue your passion without having to sacrifice everything else? David was smiling now. That particular smile he got when he was working on a problem he found interesting. A scholarship program? Maybe. I don't know. Something like that. Something that means the next girl who has to choose between Juilliard and her family's bakery doesn't have to choose. She can do both. They stayed up half the night talking about it, getting more and more excited. David knew people who ran foundations. He understood how to structure programs like this. And Maria knew what it felt like to be that talented kid in a small town, wondering if she'd ever get her shot. By the time they finally went to bed around 3 a.m, they had the beginnings of a real plan. The next morning, Maria woke up to find David already awake, sitting at their dining table with his laptop and a cup of coffee. Papers were spread out everywhere. He had that intense look on his face that he got when he was working on something important. Have you slept at all? Maria asked, patting over in her pajamas to look over his shoulder. A little, David said, not looking away from his screen. I couldn't stop thinking about what you said last night. About helping kids who are in the position you were in, so I've been doing some research. He turned the laptop so she could see better. The screen was full of statistics and numbers. Did you know that less than 5% of students at elite art schools come from working G-class families? And it's not because the talent isn't there. It's because the support system isn't there. Maria pulled up a chair, her coffee forgotten. She could see where he was going with this. Most scholarship programs just covered tuition. David continued, clicking through different tabs. But that's not really the problem, right? The problem is everything else. Living expenses, family obligations, the fact that spending 4 years studying art means 4 years not helping your family financially. Exactly, Maria said, feeling a flutter of excitement in her chest. When I left Juilliard, it wasn't because I couldn't afford the tuition. It was because my mom needed me. The bakery needed me. If there had been a way to do both, maybe things would have been different. David pulled up a blank document and started typing. So what if we created a program that covered everything, not just school costs, but living expenses for the student? And also, this is the important part, financial support for their families. so a talented kid from a small town could go to Juilliard without worrying that their mom's bakery is going to fail without them. Maria felt tears starting to form. This was exactly what she'd needed all those years ago. What so many kids like her needed right now. Over the next few weeks, the idea started to take real shape. David made calls to people he knew. Maria reached out to her old teachers asking their advice. They talked to school administrators, foundation directors, anyone who might have insight into how to make this work. It turned out there was more need than either of them had imagined. Stories started pouring in from teachers and counselors. The brilliant pianist in rural Montana whose family farm was struggling. The singer in Mississippi whose single mom worked 3 jobs. The dancer in a small town in Oregon who was helping raise her younger siblings. All these kids with incredible talent and zero chance of pursuing it. "This is bigger than we thought," Maria said one evening, looking at all the emails and letters they'd received. "There are so many of them, David. How do we help them all?" "One at a time," David said practically. "We start with a pilot program. 10 students for the first year. We work out the kinks, see what works and what doesn't, then we expand." Maria loved how his mind worked, breaking big, impossible problems down into manageable steps. It was how he'd built his company. Now he was applying that same approach to this. But creating a foundation was just part of what happened in those weeks after the gala. Maria also started reconnecting with music in her own life. She called the conductor from the Met who'd given her his card. Not to audition, not yet, but just to talk. To get advice. To understand what it would really take if she decided to pursue this. "Your technique is excellent," he told her over coffee. "A little rusty, maybe, but nothing that some focused training wouldn't fix. But Mrs. Chen, I have to be honest with you. The professional music world is brutal. It's not just about talent. It's about politics and luck and being willing to sacrifice everything for it." "I don't want to sacrifice everything," Maria admitted. "I already did that once in reverse. I gave up music for my family. I don't regret it. But I don't want to swing completely the other way either. I want balance," the conductor smiled. "Then maybe the traditional career path isn't for you, but that doesn't mean you can't have music in your life. There are other ways." He introduced her to a friend who ran a community music program, small performances at local venues, teaching workshops for young singers, recording sessions for independent projects, ways to be involved in music without it consuming your entire life. Maria started small. She agreed to perform at a local charity event for a women's shelter. Just 2 songs. When she walked off that stage, she felt the same aliveness she'd felt at David's gala. That sense of connection, of purpose. The director of the shelter approached her afterward. "Would you consider coming back? Maybe once a month?" "The women here, they loved it. Many of them are going through the hardest time of their lives. Your music gave them a moment of peace." So Maria started performing once a month at the shelter. Then someone heard about it and asked if she'd sing at a fundraiser for a children's hospital. Then another request came and another. All small venues. All for causes that mattered. Maria found herself saying yes more often than no. She also started going back to the bakery more regularly. After her mom died, Maria had hired a manager to run the day-to-day operations. But now she found herself wanting to be there again. Not out of obligation, but because she missed it. The smell of fresh bread. The regular customers. The simple satisfaction of creating something with her hands. "You seem happier," David observed one Saturday morning. They were having breakfast in the apartment and Maria had flour on her shirt from the early morning baking session she'd just come from. "I am happier," Maria admitted. "I feel like I'm finally figuring out how to be all the different parts of myself, the baker and the singer, your wife and my own person. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," David said. "You know what I think? I think you're showing people that you don't have to choose just one thing. You can be complicated. You can contain multitudes." 6 weeks after the gala, they held the first official meeting for what they'd decided to call the Martinez Foundation, named after Maria's mother. The name had made Maria cry when David suggested it. Her mom would have loved this. She'd always believed in helping others, in lifting up your community. They'd assembled a small team, an executive director with experience running educational nonprofits, a program coordinator who'd come from a working-class background herself and understood the challenges these students would face, a financial advisor to handle the money side of things, and David and Maria providing the vision and the funding. "We're starting with 10 students for the first year," the executive director explained, showing them profiles of candidates they'd already identified. Each one will receive full tuition to their school of choice plus a living stipend. But the real innovation is the family support component. She clicked to the next slide. Each student's family will receive financial assistance equivalent to what the student would have earned if they'd been working instead of studying. So there's no financial penalty for pursuing their art. Plus, we're providing mentorship, career counseling, and networking opportunities. Maria looked at the faces on the screen. 10 kids ranging in age from 17 to 23, each one with a story that reminded her of her own. Each one with talent and dreams and obstacles in their way. "When do we start?" she asked. "Applications open next month," the director said. "We should have our first cohort selected by fall." After the meeting ended and everyone else had left, Maria stayed behind, looking at those faces on the screen. David came to stand beside her. "Your mom would be so proud," he said quietly. "I hope so," Maria whispered. "I keep thinking about what she used to say, that God gives everyone gifts and we have a responsibility to use them, not just for ourselves but for others too." "I think this is what she meant," David pulled her close. "You're using your gifts, both of them." The music and the heart. That's a pretty powerful combination. The foundation wasn't the only big change happening. Maria also made a decision about the Met conductor's offer to audition. She called him and explained that she wasn't looking for a full-time career. But she was interested in guest performances, special events, things that would let her keep her life balanced while still challenging herself musically. To her surprise, he was enthusiastic about the idea. "We actually have a spring gala coming up," he said. "Very prestigious event. We were going to have one of our regular performers, but having someone new and exciting could be even better. Would you be interested?" Maria's first instinct was to say no, to stick with the small venues where she felt comfortable, but then she remembered what David had said about fear being the worst reason to make a decision. "Yes," she heard herself saying. "I'm interested." So she started training again, seriously this time. She found a vocal coach, a retired opera singer who lived in the city. 3 times a week, Maria would go to her studio and work. Scales and exercises, breathing techniques, going back to basics and rebuilding her foundation. It was hard work, harder than she remembered. Her voice was good, but it wasn't in the same shape it had been when she was 19 and practicing 4 hours a day. Some days she'd leave her lesson feeling frustrated and discouraged. "This is normal," her coach assured her. "You're essentially an athlete who took several years off. Your instrument is still beautiful, but it needs conditioning. Be patient with yourself." Maria tried to be patient, though it didn't come naturally to her. She was used to being good at things. But she kept showing up, kept doing the work, and slowly she could feel herself improving. Her breath control getting stronger, her range expanding, the rust wearing off. Meanwhile, the bakery was thriving. With Maria coming in more regularly, bringing fresh energy and ideas, business had actually picked up. She'd started offering special orders again, something she'd stopped doing when things got busy. Wedding cakes, birthday cakes, the kind of custom work that required time and attention. "You're working yourself too hard," David warned one evening. Maria had come home exhausted from a day that had started at 4 in the morning at the bakery and included a VOC.